The rain didn't fall all at once. At first, it hovered in the air, like the city itself was holding its breath. A soft mist clung to the glass walls of the skyscraper, blurring reflections, dulling edges. The kind of rain that felt undecided, whether it wanted to stay gentle or become something heavier. Daniel Harper stood just inside the revolving doors of Arden Global, staring straight ahead, his hands still resting on the cool metal frame as the door slowly came to a stop behind him. For a moment, he didn't move. The building hummed quietly around him, polished floors, muted footsteps, distant elevator chimes. People passed by without looking at him. To them, he was just another man in a dark suit, another face in a city that never paused long enough to remember anyone. But to Daniel, everything felt loud. The words replayed in his mind over and over, each time landing harder than before. "Thank you for coming in today. After a careful consideration, we've decided to move forward with other candidates." He had nodded when they said it, even smiled, said, "I understand, thank you for your time." He had practiced that smile for years. Now, alone, it faded. Daniel pushed the door and stepped outside. The rain made its decision. It came down steadily now, cold and unapologetic, soaking into his jacket within seconds. He didn't reach for his umbrella. He hadn't even remembered to bring one. He stood there as water slid down his collar, darkening the fabric over his shoulders, seeping into the crease of his elbows. Across the street, traffic rushed by, tires slicing through puddles, splashing gray water onto the curb. The city kept moving. It always did. Daniel reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the folded paper. He already knew what it said. Still, he unfolded it slowly, smoothing it out with his thumb as if giving it care might soften the message. The words blurred slightly as rain dotted the page. "We regret to inform you." He exhaled through his nose, a breath that carried more weight than air should. Failed. Not good enough. Not chosen. He folded the paper again, more carefully this time, and slid it back into his pocket. Then he adjusted the strap of his briefcase on his shoulder and started walking. Each step felt measured, deliberate, like if he walked too fast, the disappointment might catch up to him and knock him flat. As he moved down the sidewalk, memories surfaced without permission. Emma's voice that morning. "Daddy, do I look okay?" She had stood in front of him wearing her favorite blue sweater, the one with the tiny embroidered stars. Her backpack sat at her feet, slightly too big for her frame. "You look perfect," he had said, kneeling to straighten her collar. "Are you nervous?" she had asked. He'd smiled then, a real one. "A little." She had wrapped her arms around his neck. "You always do good things when you're nervous." The thought tightened his chest now. Daniel stopped at the corner, waiting for the light to change. Rain streamed down his hair and into his eyes, but he didn't wipe it away. He welcomed the sting. It kept him present. He wondered how he was going to tell her. Inside Arden Global, several floors above the street, the conference room had emptied. Chairs sat pushed back slightly from the long glass table. Half-empty water bottles reflected the fluorescent lights. Victoria Arden remained seated. She hadn't moved since the door closed behind the last panel member. Her hands were folded neatly in front of her, fingers interlaced, posture perfect, exactly as shareholders expected, exactly as magazines described her. Controlled, brilliant, unshakable. Yet something felt off. She replayed the interview in her mind, not the polished answers from the candidates before Daniel Harper, but his pauses. The way he took a moment before responding. The way he admitted uncertainty instead of hiding it. The way his voice softened when he mentioned his daughter. She remembered the faint crease between his brows when asked about long work hours. The way his jaw tightened, not in defiance, but in calculation. "I'll always meet expectations, but my daughter comes first. I'm honest about that." One of the panelists had shifted uncomfortably at that. Victoria hadn't. At least not outwardly. She stood now and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling window. The city stretched beneath her, gray and wet. Tiny figures moved along the sidewalk, umbrellas bobbing like dark petals. Then she saw him, Daniel Harper. She recognized him instantly, no hesitation, no doubt. He stood at the corner, shoulders slightly hunched, rain soaking into him as if he didn't care enough to avoid it. Walking away. A strange ache spread through her chest. Victoria had built her life on decisions, on choosing what was efficient, what was safe, what was profitable. She trusted systems, she trusted data. But something about this felt wrong. Not illogical. Human. She glanced at the empty chair across from her where Daniel had sat just minutes earlier. "You don't belong here," someone on the panel had said after he left. Too risky. Victoria had agreed. Now, watching him from above, she wasn't so sure. Her phone buzzed, calendar reminder, another meeting, another decision. She silenced it. Before she could think too much, Victoria turned, grabbed her coat, and walked out. The elevator ride down felt longer than usual. Each floor ticked by with a soft time echoing in the quiet car. She caught her reflection in the mirrored wall, hair slightly out of place, expression unreadable. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel certain. The doors opened. Victoria stepped into the lobby, heels clicking sharply against the floor. She pushed through the revolving doors and into the rain without hesitation. "Mr. Harper." The voice cut through the sound of rainfall. Daniel didn't turn. He took another step forward, then another, the crosswalk light still red. "Daniel, please wait." He stopped. Slowly, he turned around. Victoria stood a few feet behind him, chest rising and falling more quickly than it should have. Rain darted her coat, clung to strands of hair near her face. She looked human. "Yes?" Daniel asked, cautiously, respectfully. "I'm sorry," she said, lifting a hand slightly. "I know this is unusual, but I couldn't let you leave without speaking to you again." The light changed. Cars surged forward, forcing them to step closer to the curb. "I don't think there's anything left to say," Daniel replied quietly. Victoria shook her head. "I think there is." She gestured across the street. "There's a cafe. Please, 5 minutes." Daniel hesitated. Pride told him to walk away, to preserve what little dignity he had left. But something in her voice, something unpolished and sincere, made him nod. "Okay." They crossed together, the rain easing slightly as they entered the cafe. Warmth wrapped around them immediately, and for the first time that day, Daniel felt like he could breathe. The cafe smelled like coffee and cinnamon, the kind of warmth that settles slowly into your bones instead of rushing you. The windows were fogged from the sudden change in temperature, blurring the outside world into soft gray shapes. Rain topped gently against the glass, quieter now, like it had finally decided to listen. Daniel stood just inside the door, unsure where to put himself. Victoria Arden moved first, ordering 2 coffees without asking what he wanted. He noticed that, how she assumed, but not arrogantly, more like she was trying to make the moment easier, smoother, less awkward. "Sit," she said gently, nodding towards a small table near the window. Daniel did. He placed his briefcase carefully at his feet, straightened his damp jacket, and folded his hands together in his lap. The chair felt too small, or maybe he felt too exposed. He wasn't used to being on the other side of power. Victoria sat across from him, removing her coat. Without the sharp lines of the boardroom and the elevated chair at the head of the table, she seemed different, smaller almost, still commanding, but softer around the edges. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy, full. The barista called out an order number. Cups clinked. Somewhere behind the counter, a machine hissed. Victoria broke the quiet first. "I watched you walk away," she said simply. Daniel lifted his eyes, surprised. "I shouldn't have," she continued. "I usually don't let things follow me past the room. Decisions are made and that's it. But today," she paused, searching for the right words. "Today didn't sit right." The barista placed 2 steaming mugs on the table. Victoria slid one towards Daniel. "Thank you," he said automatically. He wrapped his hands around the cup, letting the heat seep into his fingers. Only then did he realize how cold he had been, not just from the rain, but from the weight of the day. Victoria watched him quietly. "You didn't fail because you weren't capable," she said. "You failed because the room was afraid." Daniel let out a short, humorless breath. "That's not usually how it works." "No," she agreed, "but it's how it happened." She leaned back slightly. "Tell me something, Daniel, and don't polish it. Why did you really apply here?" He stared into his coffee. The surface trembled slightly from his grip. "For stability," he said finally, "for my daughter." Victoria waited. "She's 9, smart, observant, notices everything I try to hide." A faint smile touched his lips. "She hasn't had much consistency since her mom passed." "I'm sorry," Victoria said quietly. Daniel nodded once, acknowledging it without inviting sympathy. "I used to chase growth, titles, raises, long hours. Then one day, none of that mattered. What mattered was being home at night, helping with homework, making dinner, sitting with her when she couldn't sleep." He looked up. "That doesn't make me less ambitious. It just changed what ambition looks like." Victoria felt something tighten in her chest. "How long ago?" asked Victoria. 3 years. Cancer. Fast. Ruthless." Silence settled again. Outside, a bus hissed to a stop, its doors opening with a mechanical sigh. Daniel continued. "I stepped back, took smaller roles, flexible hours, not because I couldn't do more, but because I chose not to leave her alone in the dark." Victoria nodded slowly. "And in that room," she said, "someone called that personal baggage." Daniel didn't react. He had heard worse. "I didn't run this company to punish people for loving their families," Victoria said. Her voice was steady, but something underneath it trembled. "When I was younger," she said, "I lost someone too, and I chose work. I told myself it was necessary, that success required it." Her gaze softened. "Sometimes I wonder who I would be if I'd chosen differently." Daniel didn't interrupt. He sensed how rare this honesty was for her. "I can't change the panel's vote," she said, "but I can change what happens next." She took a breath. "I want to offer you a 6-month trial role. It's not ceremonial, it's real work, real expectations. You'll report directly to a senior team, and I'll be involved." Daniel's heart began to pound. "And if I fail," he asked, "then you walk away with experience, respect, and my personal recommendation. No harm, no shame." "And if I succeed?" Victoria allowed herself a small smile. "Then we both prove something." Daniel leaned back in his chair, processing. This wasn't charity, he could feel that. It wasn't pity, it was recognition. "I don't want this because you feel guilty," he said quietly. "I don't," she replied without hesitation. "I want this because when you walked out, it felt like we were letting the wrong person leave." He swallowed. "I'll work harder than anyone you've hired, not because I'm desperate, but because I'm grateful." Victoria nodded. "That's all I ask." They sat there for a moment longer, the weight of what had just happened slowly settling between them. Outside, the rain had eased into a light drizzle. Daniel glanced at the window, then back at her. "My daughter's waiting for me." Victoria stood. "Then don't keep her." They shook hands. This time, Daniel's grip was steady. As he stepped back into the street, the city felt different. Not brighter, not easier, but possible. And inside the cafe, Victoria watched him go, knowing that sometimes the most important decisions aren't made at the table. They're made when you stand up from it. The apartment was quiet when Daniel opened the door. Not the empty kind of quiet, but the soft, lived-in kind. The hum of the refrigerator. The faint ticking of the clock above the stove. A backpack leaned against the wall, one strap slipping down like it had given up holding itself together. "Daddy?" Emma's voice came from the kitchen, cautious and hopeful all at once. "I'm home," Daniel called back, closing the door behind him. He set his briefcase down slowly, as if the weight of it had changed, as if it now carried something more than paper and disappointment. Emma appeared in the doorway, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, pencil smudges on her fingers. She took one look at his face and froze. "Well?" she asked. Daniel knelt in front of her, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. He searched her face, those familiar eyes that looked so much like her mother's. For a moment, the words wouldn't come. "I didn't get the job," he said finally. Emma's shoulders slumped. "Oh," she whispered. "But," he continued, voice catching, "something else happened." Her eyes lifted again, curious now. He told her everything. About the rain, about the interview, about walking away, about the woman who ran after him. He told it slowly, the way you tell a story when you want every part of it to matter, when you want the listener to understand not just what happened, but how it felt. Emma listened without interrupting, sitting cross-legged on the kitchen floor, chin resting in her hands. "So, she saw you?" Emma said when he finished. Daniel smiled. "Yeah, I think she did." Emma stood and wrapped her arms around him, hugging him with the full force of her small body. "I knew it," she said into his shoulder. "I knew someone would see you." Daniel closed his eyes, holding her tightly, feeling something inside him finally loosen. That night, after homework and dinner and bedtime stories, Daniel lay awake staring at the ceiling. The rain had stopped, but the city still murmured outside. He thought about the path ahead, the fear, the responsibility, and for the first time in a long while, he felt hope. 6 months passed. Not easily, not quietly. Daniel arrived early every morning and stayed late when needed, but never without purpose. He learned systems faster than expected, asked questions without ego, listened more than he spoke. People noticed, not because he demanded attention, but because his presence steadied rooms. Victoria watched from a distance at first. She noticed how teams responded to him, how conflicts softened when he spoke, how he took responsibility without being asked and gave credit without hesitation. One evening, long after most of the building had emptied, she found him still at his desk. "You know," she said, leaning against the doorway, "you're allowed to go home." Daniel smiled. "Emma has a school project tomorrow. I promised I'd help." Victoria nodded. "Good. Keep that promise." At the end of 6 months, Daniel was called into the same conference room where it had all begun. This time, he wasn't nervous. Victoria stood at the head of the table. "We made a mistake once," she said to the room. "We won't make it again." Daniel was offered the role. Permanent, respected, secure. He walked out of the building that evening under a clear sky, sunlight reflecting off the glass tower instead of rain. And somewhere inside, Victoria Arden sat alone for a moment longer, staring at the empty chair across from her. She smiled, because success wasn't just about building something powerful. Sometimes it was about knowing when to run after someone walking away and choosing humanity over fear.